Well, Andy says hi, and so do I. You know, I love the miracles of God. You know, people say you can't walk on water, and Jesus did. You can't feed 5,000 with just a few loaves of bread and some fish. God says, why not? Can't raise the dead. God says, Well, got some more for you with Elisha. We're going to finish his story today. 2 Kings 6 tells us a story about some prophets who wanted to build a larger place for them to meet with Elisha. And Elisha said, yeah, go ahead. So the prophets invited Elisha to go with them to cut down some trees so they could build a bigger place. And, you know, remembering back to when Elijah called Elisha, Elisha was out there in the field plowing. He didn't have to. His family was well-to-do, but he was a man that didn't mind getting his hands dirty, so he went with him to cut down some trees. And while they were doing that, one of the prophets, the axe head flew off the end of the handle and landed in the water. Oh, this prophet was distressed. He called out to Elisha that it was a borrowed axe. And Elisha asked him, where did it fall? The prophet showed him where, and Elisha, said abracadabra. No, he got a stick off a tree and threw it there in the water. And the iron axe head floated right up to the surface. Okay, scientists, please explain that one to me. Because Elijah just reached out and picked it up. Now that sounds so casual. Ho-hum. The iron floated in water and the prophet picked it up. Do you wonder what look that prophet had on his face? How did he not fall into the water out of amazement? Just wondering. Put yourself in his place and try to understand this story from his viewpoint. Oh my goodness. Did this just happen? I mean, what were the other prophets thinking as they witnessed this? If you'd been one of them, what would you have been thinking? Even if they'd seen Elijah's miracles and Elisha's miracles, do you think they ever stopped becoming amazed at miracles? Yeah, probably not. Yeah. Bunch of iron floating in the water. Do you think Elisha ever got bored with God's miracles? I mean, do you think sometimes he was really amazed? Yeah, me too. I think he was. So 2 Kings 6 continues with another remarkable demonstration of God's power. And I'm not going to go into all of them, but I want to finish in this lesson. But we have seen that Aram was raiding Israel on a regular basis, but eventually the king of Aram was very angry because he was convinced someone was leaking secrets to the king of Samaria. He said it seemed like every time he set a trap, Israel avoided it. Well, his officers told him, we don't have a traitor. The prophet Elisha is telling King Joram the very words our king is speaking when he's speaking them. Well, the Arameans learned that Elisha was in Dothan at the time, so their king sent a strong force to capture Elisha. Elisha's servant was terrified at the army that had surrounded the city, an army with horses and chariots and massive infantry. But Elisha asked God to open the eyes of his servant. And then the servant saw an army with horses and chariots of fire surrounding the army of Aram. And it totally filled the hills. Wow. God's army. Well, when the enemy did attack, Elisha said, God, why? No, he didn't. He said, God blind the entire Aramean army. You got God's whole army there. Don't just casually read that. God blinded the entire army. That's like a wow, a big time, a big deal. You know, it's pretty hard for a soldier to fight while blind, right? So when Elisha told the Arameans to follow him and that he would take them to the man they were looking for, they followed him, not realizing he was the man they were actually looking for. Most of them probably never heard his voice anyway. Well, he led them into the capital city of Samaria. When they got inside the city walls, God opened their eyes. Uh-oh. They knew they were in trouble. Well, King Joram asked Elisha if he could kill them, and Elisha said no. He told the king, feed them. Mercy for those who mean you harm seems to be God's way. I mean, isn't that what Jesus said, Luke 6:27-36? Do good to those who mean you harm. Love your enemies. Think about the Good Samaritan in Luke chapter 10. So the king, he must have taken a page out of Elisha's book, I think, because not only did he feed them, but he provided them with a great feast. He went above and beyond what anyone could have expected. A good example of how we should treat people. Then the king sent them back to Aram. Didn't harm them, didn't keep them prisoner. Entire army. Upon their return, Aram stopped invading Samaria. No doubt they were shocked and rather afraid, although that peace didn't last too awfully long. If you could give a one-word title to this story, what would you call it? Well, the word I would use is blind. Elisha's servant was blind to the army of God. I mean, okay, it's not surprising, but his eyes were opened. The Arameans were blinded, and Elisha led them to his king where they became prisoners, but only if they had their eyes open. And the king didn't keep them anyway. Blind. Father, don't let us be blind. Help us to see your hand in our lives. All right. So I'm going to take a story out of 2 Kings 8 and insert it here because chronologically it belongs here. So I moved it for sake of continuity. But remember, the Bible is not an historical record. It is a teaching book. Sometimes stories are given out of sequence so that we might catch more of a theme or relate multiple stories into one concept. Pay attention and see if that isn't true. It is. So, anyway, in 2 Kings 8, Elisha went to Damascus, read that, Aram, because the king of Aram was ill. Now, the king sent his chief advisor to ask Elisha if he was going to recover from his illness. He told his advisor to take a gift. And he brought a very, very nice one. Very expensive gift. Anyway, 40 camel loads or something like that. The finest of everything. Anyway, Elisha told the king's advisor to tell the king he would recover, even though God had told him the king would die. And then Elisha began to weep. The advisor asked, "Why are you weeping?" Elisha said, "I weep because I know how much harm you will inflict on the people of Samaria. You will burn their cities, kill their young men with swords, kill little children by smashing them against the ground, and you will slice open pregnant women." Hazael Hazael, the advisor, asked how a mere servant could do such a thing, and Elisha said, God told me you will become the king of Aram. Hazael returned to the king and told him, Elisha said you're going to recover. The next day, Hazael took a thick cloth, soaked it in water, and used it to kill the king. All right, so let's jump back into 2 Kings 6, which that chapter concludes with a reminder that Aram was continuously raiding Samaria, and now there is a famine in Samaria because Aram kept taking all of their crops and animals. So the king of Aram now sent his entire army, not just raiding parties. Got to think that's Hazael, right? And they laid siege to all of Samaria for 7 years. By the end of the 7 years, the people of Samaria, they were desperate. They were paying a fortune for some very disgusting food. Food that was definitely unclean according to Mosaic law. And, translators are supposed to take the simplest translation unless something else calls for a different translation. In this case, the only thing calling for a different translation is good taste. But the translators remain true to the original. The people were eating donkey head and dove dung. Sounds gross. But, in times of extreme famine, and we have other stories from other extra-biblical sources, other cultures where they had famines, what people will eat is amazing, astounding, frightening. And that's the point the writer's trying to make here, that the famine was very severe. And, oh, by the way, I looked it up. Dove's dung was probably used so they could pick through it looking for undigested seeds. So, in fact, the famine became so severe that 2 women agreed to kill their sons and eat them. But after eating one woman's son, the other woman refused to kill and eat her son. Upon hearing this, the king was distraught, distressed. He didn't know what to do. So he threatened Elisha's life. Why? We aren't told why, but, the kings of Israel, from Ahab doing Elijah to Ahab's son attacking Elisha, they just like to attack God's prophets. Anyway, so Elisha was sitting at home with some elders when the king went to see Elisha. However, the king sent a messenger ahead to announce his arrival, something a king would do. If people knew the king was coming, they'd be prepared. The king wouldn't have to wait, blah, blah, blah. So before the king's messenger arrived, Elisha told the elders the king was sending someone to cut off his head. Elisha tells the elders, shut the door and hold it shut, so they did. And what was the king's message? I'm cutting a lot of this down, but the king's message was basically, this disaster is from God. Why should I wait for him to save us? And Elisha is going to respond to that in 2 Kings 7. But first, Elisha told the king, tomorrow, 12 pounds of the finest flour will sell for $1. The point being that it's going to be cheap. Good food is going to be cheap, the finest. Now that's a turnaround. An officer next to the king basically said, even God can't do that. Elijah looked at the man and said, you will see it with your own eyes, but you will not eat any of it. If you want to cheat and look ahead, 2 Kings 7:17. I'll get there in a minute. That's the answer to that man. So God caused the Arameans to hear the sound of a great army with many horses and chariots. They believed Israel had hired the Hittite and Egyptian kings to attack them. And as it became dark, they fled, leaving all their tents and animals and equipment and everything behind. Food, too. Now, remember that lepers were dependent upon gifts. And during a famine, they were probably more desperate than almost everyone else. And we're told that 4 lepers decided to visit the Aramean army and either die or eat. When they arrived, they found the Aramean camp empty. Now think about lepers. They discovered this empty camp, and so first thing they did was they took some valuables like gold and silver and some clothes and went off and hid them. And then these lepers, outcasts of society, decided what they were doing wasn't right. They could have easily justified themselves by saying that nobody cares about them, so why should they care about anyone else? Then they could have just stayed there as long as possible, hiding more treasure. No doubt silver and gold they had taken might make their lives a little easier, much easier. They could even give it to their families if they had any helping them and be a blessing to them. But these 4 lepers went to the city and told them about what they'd found, probably standing at the gate shouting, since nobody wanted to let them in. And when somebody went and woke up the king, and he believed it was a trap. You know, deceitful people think everyone else is being deceitful. They don't trust anyone. So he sent out just 2 chariots. Of course, they came back real quick and gave their report, and the people of the city rushed out to loot the camp, probably looking for food first and foremost. I'm going to gorge my belly. Well, the Samaritans had all they could eat and great wealth too. They were hungry. God gave them more than just food. He gave them all the wealth of the Aramean army. Oh yeah, and that officer, 2 Kings 7:17, we're there. He said, even God can't work such a miracle. The people trampled him in the gateway as they rushed out to loot. Too bad Elisha couldn't say, I told you so. Oh, and remember the woman whose husband built Elisha a room and her son died, but Elisha brought him back to life in 2 Kings 4? Well, in 2 Kings 6, we are told that Elisha had warned them about the 7 years of famine that Samaria was about to experience. So they moved to the region of the Philistines in order to survive. When the famine was over, they came home, but their land had been claimed by someone else. Now Elisha's servant told the king about the woman and what had happened. The king ordered their land returned to them, along with all of the income it had produced while they were gone. Again, God gives more than we expect if we serve him. All right, so how many stories do we do? I'm going to just cut it really short today. 2 Kings 13 tells us that Elisha was ill. We do not know what illness he was experiencing, but we are told that Jehoash, the king of Israel, went to see Elisha and wept over him, saying, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel. Do you remember someone else that said that? 2 Kings 2:12 tells us Elisha said that, those very words, when he saw Elijah going up to heaven. Doesn't it make sense that Elisha had probably shared that story? You know, but then again, God, who knows? Well, Elijah told the king from his deathbed, he told the king, get a bow and some arrows. He told the king to shoot an arrow out the window. Don't open it first. And after the king shot the arrow, Elisha declared it as the arrow of victory over Aram. Then he told the king to strike the ground with the arrows. The king struck the ground 3 times, and Elisha was not pleased. Told the king he should have struck the ground 5 or 6 times. Because he struck the ground 3 times, he would defeat Aram just 3 times. If he'd struck the ground 5 or 6 times, he would have totally destroyed Aram. Well, eventually, not told how long, but Elisha died, and he was placed in a tomb. Now, as happened all too often, some Moabite raiders attacked in the spring. Some Israelites were burying a man, but when they saw the raiders, they threw the man's body into Elisha's tomb. When the body touched Elisha's bones, the man came back to life and stood on his feet. One last miracle. God used Elisha one last time to bring a man back to life. We have no further information about that man, but wouldn't you like to know what happened to him in the rest of his life? I would. Oh God, give us faith. Give us faith to trust in you, even when everything seems hopeless. Open our eyes that we can see your hand waiting to help us. Father, thank you so much for your love and care for us. As always, we ask for your blessing through your Son, our Savior. Amen.